Hello, everybody, and welcome to PPG, Purpose, Passion, Grit. It's good to see you here today. I know the weather is absolutely beautiful, so thank you very much for coming on live with us today. I'm really thrilled to introduce Annette Davies from the charity Mary's Meals. And Annette is going to talk to us about what Mary's Meals does. In fact, I'm going to put their link in the website right now so that you can check it out, and to talk about her volunteering and what the charity does. So welcome, Annette. Thank you so much for coming on to Goldster.
You're very welcome.
Now, tell us, first of all, what is Mary's Meals?
Mary's Meals is a really simple organization about feeding some of the poorest children in the world in their place of education. So basically, it's giving free school meals to some of the poorest children because otherwise they wouldn't go to school.
And how did the charity begin? How was it founded? When was it founded?
It was founded a long time ago in 1992 when a chap called Magnus MacFarlane Barrow, who lives in Dalmally in Scotland, in the Highlands of Scotland, he was a fishing farmer. And he was in the pub one day with his brother, and they were talking about the Bosnian crisis. At that time, terrible things were happening in Bosnia, Herzegovina. And he said, "Oh God, it's such a shame. We used to have such lovely holidays when we were kids in that part of the world. We should do something." So they got the local community and said, "Can you get some blankets and some clothes, and then we could send them to Bosnia." And so he asked his dad, who had a shed in the back garden, if he could use that to store the things. And they said, "Oh, yes, fine." So in a few weeks, the shed was full. So instead of sending it to Bosnia, they hired a van and drove it down to Bosnia. And they thought, well, that's it. I'll go back to my fishing farming. They came back, the shed was full again. Wow. So they did it again. And they did that for over a year, driving back and forth. And Magnus decided that that was his calling. He wanted to do something to help people around the world in dire need. And he started an organization called Scottish International Relief, which then went out to various countries, just supporting where they could. So he did that for a few years. And then fast forward to 2002, he had been doing this for a while. He started Mary's Meals. Now that started by, again, he went out to various countries, seeing what could be done. And he went to Malawi in 2002. And in his sort of fact-finding missions, he met this family. AIDS was absolutely rife at the time. And he met a woman called Emma and her family. She had 4 children. And the husband had died of AIDS, and she was dying of AIDS. And so the 5 children, the eldest being Edward, who was 14, and he said, "Well, what's going to happen? What are your dreams? What are your hopes?" And Edward said to him, "Well, I would really like to go to school." He'd never been to school. And he said, "Also, I would love to be able to eat at least 1 meal a day." Gosh. Now that just sort of, grabbed his heartstrings, and he thought, "Gosh, we have free school meals in the UK. We could do something about that." And they raised enough money to start feeding 200 children in Malawi. So that's how it all started. And the Scottish International Relief continued. But then in 2012, he actually officially changed the name to Mary's Meals.
So tell us about the name. Is it a religious organization? Where does the name Mary's Meals come from?
Well, Mary's Meals, he wanted to name it after somebody, mainly a mother who had tried to bring her child up in poverty. And he thought whenever he traveled around the world, whoever he spoke to, irrespective of religions, everybody had heard of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and how she had been very poor. They were actually a very poor family. And he thought, well, I'm going to name it after Mary's Meals. He himself is actually a Catholic, but he is absolutely adamant that it is not a religious organization. It's for all faiths and none, and that's really important. And he very rarely mentions religion ever when he's going, or whenever anybody goes around seeing the various projects that we have now. That's really important. I'm not a religious person myself, and there are many people in the organization who are in fact completely non-religious, and I think that's really important. But he within his faith, he wants to help people, and I think the people who eventually join Mary's Meals or help in any way is because they want to make a difference in the world.
And that first family, the boy Edward, such a touching story.
Yeah.
Are they still in touch with the charity? Do we know what's happened to them?
We actually don't know about Edward. We've tried to find out, but because the organization has got larger and larger, but what we have done is we have now made many more links and follow particular children all the way through, because there are obviously thousands and now millions of children being fed. For instance, when I give presentations, there's a lovely picture of two nurses who would never have been able to go and be nurses if they hadn't had Mary's Meals.
Wow.
Then there's a wonderful girl called Veronica, I think she's in Kenya, and she said if it wasn't for Mary's Meals, she wouldn't have got an education. And last year, she graduated from university and is about to go on to do a master's degree.
Oh.
So, and there's another boy in Haiti who was originally fed. He wanted to become a musician, so he became a musician. We brought him over here and he did a couple of conferences, and he was a really good player. He's gone back to Haiti and he is now the head teacher of the school he used to get Mary's Meals from.
Fantastic. That's such a fantastic story. So how did you get involved with Mary's Meals? What was your route into working for them, and how long have you been a volunteer for?
Right. Well, originally, my sister went to live in Scotland, and she lived very near Dalmally and met Magnus, and I think at some sort of organisation event, and thought, oh, this is quite a good organisation. And I said, well, it sounds a bit religious to me. I don't think I want to be involved. And eventually she went to work for them. And next to the shed, I have to say that the shed that he originally got all the clothes and things, that is his head office. It is Brilliant. Still his head office. And they had a porter cabin, and that's where the admin worked. So my sister volunteered for them for a while. And in 2007, I thought, well, actually, you know, I'm a teacher, and I could get involved, and I could maybe help to raise some money for this organization, because feeding children in schools is just so important. So I got involved in 2007 and have been volunteering for them ever since.
Fantastic. So that's a decent amount of time now. So you must have seen a huge amount of change and heard about, you know, the stories, as you say, these successful stories of children who've been fed, and, you know, the success stories. That's a wonderful thing. It must have become really important in your life.
It has. I mean, when I was working, obviously I was a teacher, and then I became a head teacher. So I tried to do as much as I could, you know, in my own time. And they did have a sister project, which I'm afraid has only just finished. We used to collect school essentials like pens and pencils and put them in a rucksack and send the rucksacks to the schools. But they have found since COVID, it was really, really difficult, and it became more expensive. So I got involved with that to start with. And children would, instead of having a birthday present, they would say, well, look, just bring a rucksack full of school things. And they didn't have to be new. And I would collect them, and then I would take them down to a warehouse, which was a container, and then they would eventually get sent off.
Oh, how lovely. What a great idea. So the children in the schools you worked in were getting actively involved in it.
They were absolutely, and it was one of the things, because it wasn't about money. Many of the schools I worked in were extremely poor. Most of the children were on free school meals themselves.
Yes.
They could bring in some of their old pencils and rulers and things and really help. So that's how I got involved. And then I went down to Brighton for a conference and met another volunteer who happened to live about 5 minutes away from where I lived in London. And the two of us, Catherine and myself, we started a London group for Mary's Meals, because mainly it was all in Scotland, and there weren't many other groups back in 2007, 2008.
Mm.
So we eventually started the London group, and now we actually have a proper office with paid workers in London.
Wow, excellent. Well done, you.
That's how I've been involved all the time.
Yeah, fantastic. And as a head teacher yourself, and as you say, in a fairly deprived area,
Yes.
it must have really meant something to you. You must have, you see the problems that children here have
Yes.
when they're not properly fed in terms of education and concentration and things. And to think that, some children don't even get one meal a day in other parts of the world.
Exactly.
And
I think that's the thing is that for me, it's about education, because education is the way out of poverty. And if it can help not just the children, but the whole community. And that's one of the big things that we do, is it's not us giving and them taking. It's about all of us working together. And once we have built a kitchen, we spend the money building the kitchen in the school, and then it is totally locally owned.
brilliant.
It's completely and utterly by the local people, obviously overseen by various volunteers and some paid workers who work for Mary's Meals, but basically it is run completely locally.
Fantastic. And is it right that Mary's Meals is currently feeding 2 million children worldwide?
It's feeding 2.2 million.
Wow.
And going up almost all the time. So from 200 in 2002, it's gone to 2.2 in 22. So
That's
two is a very important number for us.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you identify the communities and or the children? I mean, what happens? What is the process?
Well, originally it was Magnus happened to be going to Malawi for a fact-finding mission. But now most of the time it's countries or communities coming to us. They've heard of us somehow, and they come and ask if they could, maybe we could set up a kitchen in their area. And then a certain number of people will go out to that country, check it out, because I think it's really important that the local community know that they have to run it, they have to own it, they have to get the volunteers to do all the cooking and serving of the meals. And we work a lot with partner organizations within those countries. So sometimes it might be the partner, or might be a charity, say in Liberia or in India, who approach us and say, can we come? We check it out, make sure it's all above board, make sure that the governments are happy, because sometimes some of the governments are a little bit wary about charities coming into the country. So that's always really important, to make sure they're on our side. And we're not trying to do anything other than give the children free school meals.
Yeah, which is so important. I mean, we've all heard, awful stories, and it's great that they are making sure that all that safeguarding is in place. And so how many countries are you actually working in at the moment? Do you know?
We now are working in 20 different countries. And I can tell you that the latest country that we are in is the Yemen.
Yemen, right.
We have just started in the Yemen. We're feeding, and I can tell you exactly how many, which I can't. I think we're feeding about 4,000 children in the Yemen.
Wow.
But each year or every couple of years, we seem to add a new country. At the moment, we're not trying to add any new countries. What we're trying to do is to, maintain all of the children. If we've made a promise to feed them today, we want to feed them tomorrow. We want to feed them next year until they've finished their primary school education.
Yeah.
We've only feed the children in primary schools and nursery schools. But so doing, it gives them a chance to get a good education, to be able to pass the exams, to go on to secondary school.
Yes, right.
And they can then they have many more. In a lot of the countries, a secondary school education is all you need to get a reasonable job. You don't need a higher education. So that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think it's just, as you so important to education. We cannot underestimate how important that is in terms of helping communities get on, not just the individual child. And the very fact that several of the children have said, I wouldn't have got there without Mary's meals, because presumably they couldn't have afforded to go to school. They'd have had to have worked in order to be able to eat.
Many of the children that we feed, some of them were street children. They were begging in the streets. A lot of the children would have been working for their families, working in the fields,
Yeah.
or in terrible conditions, maybe in factories and things like that. And the parents couldn't send them to school because they just couldn't afford to.
Absolutely. I think that's what many people don't realize, that they think parents are being cruel expecting their children to work. They don't realize that if they don't work, they don't eat. You know, an adult's salary often doesn't cover more than one person's needs. So parents either have to starve themselves to feed their children, then they can't work.
That's right.
You know, we have such a privileged society here, and I think it's important for people to know that.
Absolutely. And I think that the parents, and a lot of the time it is mothers, because often the fathers are in another town trying to work, but they realize that if they can get a meal at the school, one, they get it, that child doesn't need to be fed, but also they will then volunteer. They're volunteering to do this. And I can show you, we give every child a mug, or in some countries it's a plate.
Yeah.
But for instance, in a lot of the African countries, the main source of protein and everything is maize, corn.
Yeah.
So we give them a corn porridge fortified with various minerals and vitamins, and that's their meal.
Yeah.
And they have it at the beginning of the day. Now, some of the children will eat half and take the other half home at the end of the day to feed one of the other children.
Yeah, wow, that's so moving. I'm just about to put a little link in the chat from your website about your vision, so people can read exactly, you know, what everything is about. We've got a question here. What do you think of the recent news stories about growing starvation because of the war in Ukraine, and have Mary's Meals started to become involved in that part of the world at all, or around there, as things happening as a result?
Right. No, they haven't done anything in Ukraine. We're not looking towards doing anything specifically in Ukraine, because we want to continue to help the people that we're helping. And we don't have enough funds to take away. We don't want to take away from the children that we're already feeding.
Yeah.
And I have to say that we do only feed the poorest of poor, children who are very malnourished in the first place. And it's not to take away from some of the terrible things that are going on around the world. And there is a nice quote on the website that Magnus has written, a little piece, just a little paragraph about why he's doing this. I mean, he's still very much involved in the whole of the organization, although there are other people. But I think that I think it is difficult because there are so many terrible things happening in the world.
Yes.
Ukraine is just one of them, but they are not, most of the time, they are not going to actually die from
starvation. And you haven't noticed that the maybe the countries you work with wouldn't be importing grain from the Ukraine or Russia anyway? You haven't noticed a problem with getting supply?
No, well, one of the things that we really try to do is source the food locally as much as we possibly can. A lot of the places we work, they're subsistence farmers, so we're helping them by buying their maize, or their rice, or their fish, depending on where we are. So we're supporting the whole community.
It's a really great thing to do, to support the local food producers. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, the prices have gone up tremendously, but the price of how much we ask, one of the things we never do when we give talks obviously to schools and churches and any organization who will listen to us. We never ask for donations, but we tell them how much it costs.
And how much does it cost?
And to feed one child for one whole year in the school, so it's probably about 190 days. I mean, our schools go to school for 190 days, so it's about half a year. A bit.
Yeah.
£15.90.
Wow.
For one child for one whole year.
Wow.
I'm just amazed that they can do that. It works out to about 8p a meal. So I always say that, you know, when you're going out and you're going to have a nice coffee and a cake and a sandwich, that's one meal. But the amount of money that you've just paid for one meal will feed one child for a whole year. I think another thing to impress, I think a lot of charities spend a lot of their money in trying to fundraise, and they have, you know, these fancy dinners with celebrities and all that sort of thing. We don't do that at all. We work almost entirely with volunteers, but we do say that 93 pence in every pound will be spent specifically on charitable activities.
It's great.
Only 7p is spent on the administration and the fundraising part of it.
That's so good to know, because so often, you know, I get frustrated when I see those people standing on the street trying to get you to donate, and we're talking to them once and they're paid something like £12 an hour, and I thought, well, you know, it's actually really, really frustrating, because like you, I've done a lot of volunteer work for charities, and I think, and obviously people need jobs. I'm not saying they don't need jobs, but it is frustrating when you think how much, you know, charities who send you out things as a you know, little plastic things or pens, and you think, why are you wasting your funds on this? So it's really good to me to hear of a charity that does that. We have a comment here that's a very sobering thought: £15.90 for the year. That is a very, very sobering thought. And I've rather cheekily put in the chat where you can donate. I'm definitely not forcing anyone to donate, by the way, just if you want to, there is a little link in the chat right now. So what areas of the world are you particularly focusing on at the moment, and why those particular areas?
We're focusing on the Horn of Africa, which is mainly Ethiopia and South Sudan at the moment, because there have been terrible droughts in that part of the world, and therefore much famine. And so we're feeding quite a few children there, and I can tell you how many children we're feeding. We're feeding 30,000 in Ethiopia and just under 76,000 in South Sudan. And because of the famine, because of the wars that are happening, we're going to really put a big focus in the next month on those two countries, because we can't source the food so locally at the moment because of the drought. That there's just no food, so we're having to bring it in. So there's going to be a bit of a push to try and continue to be able to feed those children. And in Ethiopia, we feed in the Tigrayan area, and because of the war, they haven't been able to get a lot of food, and even communication has been quite difficult. But we have some wonderful partner organizations that are very, very trustworthy that we are working with.
So that's another very sobering thought. You know, people here are getting cross that we've got a host pipe ban.
Yes.
And we think exactly. A drought in another country actually stops people from eating. You know, doesn't just stop your lawn from being green, it stops children or anybody from eating. I mean, that's such an interesting.
It puts everything in perspective.
Yeah, it does. A great. So tell us about this cloth. We can see that you're sitting on a Mary's Meals cloth. What is that, and who made it? What does it signify?
It was made originally for some of the volunteers, especially in Malawi and Liberia. They wear sort of wraparound sarongs as part of their traditional dress, really. And so the material was made for them. So if you go on the website and you see some pictures or some videos, you'll see and it's mainly women. I have to admit, the cooks are mainly women. The men are probably in the fields. And they'll be wearing this cloth, and then we just use it as a nice backdrop or a tablecloth when we're giving presentations.
Oh, it's lovely. And have you ever managed to go to any of the countries that you work with?
No. I've been to the countries. I've been to India, and I've been to some of the African countries, but not specifically for Mary's Meals. And my bucket list number one is to go to Malawi, which is the original country. We're feeding over 1 million children every day
Right.
in Malawi, and I would really like to go and visit that country.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to do that within the next couple of years.
And that's all obviously self-funded. I just want to point that wouldn't be the charity paying for it.
No. Any volunteer who goes to any of these countries funds themselves completely.
Yeah.
And we obviously get links for people to stay with and so on. But
that's nice. So you could go and stay with volunteers out there.
Yes. And that's what happens quite a bit. I think the odd person has been paid for. I know that a girl up in Scotland, I think she wrote to the local paper and said it's terrible that we can't give free school meals to certain children around the world. And I think she raised £150,000.
Wow.
And she was I think 10 years old.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow, what a lovely girl.
So she was actually invited to go out to see what her contribution had done.
That is amazing. I think I found the quotation you said from Magnus, if this is the one you mean. So Magnus MacFarlane Barrow, great name.
Yes.
What's important to us is the hungry child. When there are hungry children in front of us today, we're going to feed them. And at the same time, we're going to work on the solution to getting them fed in the long term, creating a global movement of people who believe in this vision. Is that the quotation you were thinking about?
Yes. And I think it is. One of the things we always say is we're looking to feed the next hungry child.
Yeah.
Just a little anecdote. In Haiti, we went out occasionally, if there's a disaster in the countries where we do feed the children, we will help in disaster funds. And we went out to Haiti after the earthquake. And I think sometimes we forget that 250,000 people were killed. 300,000 people were injured in that earthquake. And of course, most of the schools that we worked in were destroyed. So we went out there specifically to help rebuild the schools and so on. And some of the mothers, they make, because the children are so hungry, they make what they call mud cakes.
Right.
So it's a little biscuit made out of mud with a little bit of sugar in it.
Gosh.
And they feed that to their children because they are so hungry. So at least it's something that's filling their stomachs.
Gosh.
It doesn't do them any good.
No.
But I think something that's even sadder is that those mothers make the biscuits that they can go out into the markets and they can sell those mud biscuits to somebody else.
Wow.
And I think that that's the sort of children that we're helping, is those children. And one of those children, like, as I said earlier, became a head teacher and a musician. And it was because we said, you can't eat mud cakes. You have to come to school and have a meal.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, it must be incredible for those children to actually be given for the first time a meal every day.
Yes.
And you must, I mean, the teachers must see a real change in the way that the children can relate to each other, the way that they can kind of educate.
Absolutely. I think obviously the first thing is getting them into school, because it's about education and feeding them as well. So they go to school, they concentrate much better, but they are much happier because they are not hungry. One of the things that we used to always put in the rucksacks was a tennis ball.
Yeah.
We said, children need to play. They don't have to go to work. They can go to school, they can get an education, but they can also have fun.
Yeah.
And I think it was really important.
Yes, very important.
And I think if you go onto the website, if you see any of the films, none of them are staged. They are all so happy to be able to go to school and to have that meal.
I've always noticed that whenever I've been traveling, how in this country children can play, well, throughout
yes.
much of the Western world, like, oh, we shouldn't have to go to school, and then you go to a country where going to school is a real privilege and appreciated, and children who just are so excited about going to school and understand the importance of how lucky they are to go. And I mean, it's such a totally different mindset. And isn't it great that we live in a country where children are fortunate enough
Yes.
to be able to go, ooh, I hate school, but it's just heartbreaking to think how many children, really don't get that chance.
And
We have a comment here. A wonderful organization. I'm a recently retired head teacher myself, and we supported Mary's Meals. Thank you very much for that, Evelyn. That's really great to hear. Do you have connections with lots of schools?
I have connections with a few schools. What I've been doing since I moved out of London and came down to Kent, I've got in touch with a lot of the Rotary clubs and Seroptimus clubs and various other clubs that do a lot of work in different organizations. And the Rotary have been very active in supporting Mary's Meal. So I've done quite a lot of presentations. Of course, when I moved down to Kent, fairly soon afterwards, it was in lockdown and COVID.
Yeah.
You see, I couldn't go out. I'd never used Zoom before. I'm not a technical person.
Well, you managed perfectly well today.
Yes, so I got some training to do Zoom. So I did loads of Zoom presentations as well. And I've done some in schools, but I think our big push for the next academic year is to see how many schools we can actually get into and just give a talk and go to local markets as well.
Sorry, do you give a talk to the parents or the children?
Children.
Adults. The children, great. So
I do it. I give an assembly. I talk for about 10 minutes or so, not very long. And children are so receptive to helping other children.
And what kind of things have come out of that? Have you had some really lovely stories coming out of that?
Yes, well, it wasn't me personally, but another volunteer gave a talk to a school in Brighton, and one little boy was so moved by it. He was the one who started and said, I don't want any birthday presents. He is now 18, 20, something like that. He has supported Mary's Meals. He has cycled from Land's End to John O'Groats for Mary's Meals with his mom. He's done all sorts of activities and projects specifically for Mary's Meals, and it all started from going to school and listening in an assembly. So those sort of things happen all the time. And I think,
are they very sorry?
Yeah, go on.
Are they very shocked at the concept that children don't necessarily even have one meal a day?
Yes, they are very shocked. And when they see the film and see the sorts of things that the children have had to do beforehand, the begging in the streets, the living on rubbish dumps. In many areas, the children just scavenge on rubbish dumps. And it's just a concept that they don't see much on television these days.
Yeah.
They don't see that sort of thing. And when they see it, they are really, really moved. And a lot of them, they come in the next day just with a little bit of pocket money and say, well, look, can you give that to Mary's Meals? And what we do is we put a top on this and make it into a money box.
Yeah.
So that people just put in the monies. And it's amazing how much it comes to when you add it all up.
I've realized that whenever I've been there shaking a tin or whatever, and I think people are always really embarrassed, oh, you've got a few coppers. If every single person gave their loose change, you'd get a lot. You don't expect as a fundraiser, you're not standing there asking people to put £20 notes in. No. I was always really grateful to anybody, even if it's just like a 5 pence or a few coppers, because it really does add up. It's astonishing. So I think, do say that to people that, as if you're going past somebody, it's so seldom now where they're not asking you to do a contactless thing, but honestly, just give a few pence, but don't think it's embarrassing, because it really does make a difference.
Absolutely. It does. I mean, if I see any pennies on the floor, I will always pick them up and pop them in the pot.
We have a comment saying, wondering which school you were head teacher at, and if you're prepared to say that on Zoom. My school, this teacher says, was a London school too. Perhaps it was you who gave the talk at my school. It was.
Well, I was originally a head teacher in Tower Hamlets, and the school was called Globe Primary School, which I think is fantastic because I love the globe and I love everything about the world and visiting lots of countries. I do a lot of traveling. So that was, and then I moved to Haringey and I worked in a primary school in Haringey. But I did give quite a few talks in various other schools
Yeah.
around London.
Wonderful. So there's a special thing at the moment, isn't there? Triple your donations. Can you tell everybody about
Yes.
that?
What occasionally a donator, a big maybe corporate donator or even an individual will want to give a lot of money. And the way they do that is if you have a direct debit or if you want to start a direct debit, for the next 3 months, that amount of money will be tripled. So for instance, if you donate £5, you just make a direct debit for £5, it will be tripled to £15 for the next 3 months. So what a lot of people do, I mean, I have a direct debit, so I will up the direct debit for 3 months and then stop it and go back to my original one. So people will just do it for 3 months, knowing that it's going to be tripled.
Yeah, that's really good.
And we were able to do that last year, and I think the person has donated up to about £150,000, which is marvelous. And then the other thing that sometimes happens is for the last few years, the government has committed to choosing a couple of charitable organizations, and that will double the amount of money. I think it's just for 2 months. It's during the Christmas period. So November, December, January, the government will double every donation up to a few £1 million.
Wow.
We call that double the love.
That's really good.
So that's something to look out for later on this year.
Well, we've got two people here. One says they were a head teacher in Haringey and the other was a teacher in Haringey for many years, but unfortunately never heard of Mary's Meals. But now hopefully schools are going to hear. So I'd just say to everybody here today, make sure you just tell your friends and family and any teachers that you know about Mary's Meals. There's looking on the website, they've got quite a few things they're looking for volunteers. One thing I was quite interested in, they're looking for translators, community ambassadors, and in graphic design. It says in Croatia and some other countries too, design professionals and students are getting involved by developing artwork and other visuals for campaigns to help support the work of fellow volunteers and fundraisers.
Lovely.
Creating eye-catching designs is a wonderful gift because their efforts help to bring news of our work to new hearts and minds and ultimately help to feed more children. So it's lovely to see that there's all the different volunteer roles. What does your life as a volunteer for Mary's Meals, what does it involve?
I'm now the lead ambassador for Kent, and it involves obviously giving lots of presentations wherever I can, but also going out to organisations and to schools, so getting involved in that way, trying to get other volunteers. So if anybody's out there who knows anybody in Kent who would like to help, for instance, I got in touch with the local farmers market and said, is it possible for me to have a stall there? Just, not for asking for donations or anything, but just to spread the word.
Yeah.
We have a magazine and we have some leaflets that we give out. The magazine, in fact, costs 7p to produce, so we try not to spend very much. We produce one of those just with different information in.
Yeah.
And what we do is we have a little leaflet, volunteers. So that's quite a big part of what I do, is trying to get other volunteers to become ambassadors. You mentioned the word ambassador. We call them ambassadors.
Yeah.
If you go on to the volunteer part of the website, you'll see a picture of some people. And the two little black girls there are my goddaughters who I've got involved in helping to volunteer. So we went to the local markets and gave out lots of leaflets.
Yeah.
And from that, we've got a few more volunteers. Around the world, we have many, many volunteers, and there are quite a few countries now who are affiliates. So work like in Croatia, in Germany, in USA, Canada, lots of different countries. We have now offices and organizations. In Malawi, for instance, we have over 100,000 volunteers working. A lot of those are the mothers and fathers helping within the kitchens. Some of them are just going out talking. Some of them will be helping to the distribution. But in I would say the Western countries, It's about spreading the word.
Yeah.
And what we always say is, if you read the leaflet, you then pass it on. You maybe take it to the local doctor's surgery and leave it there. It's just about spreading the word.
Yeah, spreading the word and getting the name of Mary's Meals out. I mean,
Yeah.
I had never heard of it until about a year ago, when I actually saw at a shopping centre, I saw an advert for it and thought, oh, that looks like a really interesting charity. So
Yes, I think that's the thing.
the
Is
word out there is the important thing,
yeah,
isn't it?
I think more and more people are getting to know. But again, it's not a big charity that goes out advertising, like, say, Save the Children Fund and those sort of charities that do wonderful work, and they're very well known.
Yeah.
So it's such a small charity. We do have celebrities
Mhm.
who support us. We just don't really advertise the fact. I mean, if you go on the website, you've probably seen Gerald Butler.
I think I saw Emma Thompson and her sister Sophie
Emma,
Thompson as well.
Emma
I think.
Thompson,
Yeah.
yes, Annie Lennox, Gordon Brown, the politician, even Nicola Sturgeon knows and has contributed. And Gerard Butler is a famous actor, I believe. I haven't seen any of his films.
He's a very famous actor. Actor. That's a famous butler. Very famous actor.
He went out with Magnus, and they produced a film just about the children and what they do, and that's quite a nice. It's just about half an hour to watch.
Yeah.
And you can see all those films on the website.
We've got a question. I'm in Kent. Where do you volunteer? Is it based anywhere particularly, or is it at your home?
Well, it's at my home. I mean,
right. Okay. So it's not.
I live near Rochester and Maidstone. That person, and I have got my own email. It's annette.davies@marysmeals.org.
And you can always email him via the website and ask to be put in touch with you, can't they?
That's right. Again, if you the head office website, or there's also various, and then they will link you up with either the London and South East, or link you up with me.
Yeah, and wherever you are in the country, if you're wanting to volunteer, I would suggest that you do contact the charity directly, because I've put the link into the chat of where to volunteer, but if you just type Mary's Meals into a search engine, it will come up, and you can find the volunteer pages.
And there are all sorts of things. I mean, a lot of people, in fact, Catherine, the person I sort of started London with, she doesn't like to give talks, so she does everything else. So some people, they're just stuffing envelopes, or in the background, or setting up a stall, but they don't actually want to do any talking. And maybe they want to do it just for one-offs. People will do things for a couple of times and then do something else, which is absolutely fine. Any help at any time is absolutely wonderful.
Brilliant. I'm just going to briefly tell everyone what's coming up, and then I shall come back to you, Annette, so don't go anywhere. Okay. Just stay there. So next week on PPG, everybody, you've got Humphrey, and he's going to be talking to Tess Eagle Swan and her rescue dog Kratu. And Humphrey says the bond between an autistic woman and a Romanian rescue dog. Kratu succeeds where the system fails me. That's what Tess said about her dog. Where I was isolated, lost and lonely, he's brought me companionship, motivation to look after him and his welfare, makes me face my own issues and get through them, as his well-being is vital to me. The following week, Alistair Hicknell is back, and he's going to be interviewing the veteran cricketer and journalist Vic Marks. And then on the 24th of August, we've got a special PPG evening special. I'm going to be talking to Andrew Leon Hanna, who is an Egyptian-American lawyer, entrepreneur, and author who lives in Florida. And he is co-founder and CEO of Dream X America, where he works with refugee entrepreneurs. And he's written a book called 25 Million Sparks, The Untold Story of Refugee Entrepreneurs. And then the very last Tuesday of the month, the 30th of August, Rosie Stancer is back talking to Kate Rawls, who is an environmentalist, an adventurer, and a cyclist. And then just to tell you all what's coming up on the book club, our sister program on Thursdays and Fridays. We've got coming up this week, Humphrey is talking to Alex Finley, who is the author of Victor in Trouble, a cliff-hanging inside story. Humphrey is promising you a satirical novel called Victor in Trouble, and the author is, so I've just got to go back a bit. Sorry. sorry, my website has just completely lost. The author is Alex Finlay. And then I'm talking on Friday to Gavin Collinson, who is the author of a new book called An Accident in Paris. It's a detective story set around an investigation into the accident that killed Diana, Princess of Wales. Then so come back on Thursday and Friday for our book club. And just so that you remember, the book of the month this month is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. So get reading that. I love it. As you all know, it's a wonderful book, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it all with you. We did a modern book last month, and this month we're going back to doing classics. So Annette, back to Mary's Meals. So one of the things that I found really fascinating reading on your website was about the kind of blogs and the features. And there was one about a Syrian boy called Amjad. And he talks about loving the sandwiches that he has at his school. They do cheese sandwiches at his school, which I think is really interesting. You talked about how it's the local communities that do these rather than, you know, the Mary's Meals themselves dictating. It's just what would be eaten there locally. But it really is a very moving article, because it says the opportunity for children to learn and develop skills to support themselves in the future is essential for the growth of any nation. In Syria, more than 500,000 children are unable to attend school. The food we provide acts as a vital incentive for children who might otherwise not be encouraged to attend school and secure an education. And this simple act of learning gives children a sense of stability amid the chaos of war. That to me is so incredibly moving, that the importance of what you're doing as Mary's Meals. It's not just giving the children food, it's encouraging parents to send them to school in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, it is all about the education, and education lifts a community out of poverty. One of the things that I didn't say was often in very poor countries, if you can send your child to school, you'll send the boy if you've got boys and girls. We insist that at least 50% of the children within that school that we're feeding are going to be girls.
That's excellent. That's really good to hear.
Often the girls are the head of the household in many communities, and the more educated they are, first of all, the less pregnant they get, because it's not just about reading, writing, arithmetic that we're teaching them. They're taught what is necessary within that community, and health and nutrition is very important. They also learn much more about finances, about what crops to sow, what sort of fertilizers are better for that particular community. So, you know, the education is really the key for all of these.
And it's educating the whole community, not just those children.
Yeah, I mean, just for instance, in Malawi alone, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, 70% of the country live below the poverty line.
Wow.
And yet Mary's Meals, I mean, one of his Magnus's visions was, you know, you can't feed all of the children, but you can start by feeding one. And well, he started by feeding 200. And his vision is to, if we could give free school meals to every child, at least in one country.
Yeah.
But he's actually obviously expanded to more countries. At the moment in Malawi, we are feeding 35% of the whole of the primary school population.
That's incredible.
That's just one charity. And as your IT person, there's lots of charities working in all of these different countries, and they really do make a difference.
Yeah, and I think it's also very important, your comment about at least you can feed one child, because I think sometimes we can get so overwhelmed with the misery and the heartbreak, and what can we do, what can we as one person do, that sometimes people just think, oh, it's impossible, I can't cure the world's ills. But to think that if you can just help that one child.
Yes, and I think that's something that has kept me going with Mary's Meals, that it has grown and grown, and feeding, you know, we're now aiming, we couldn't believe when we got to 1 million, and then we got to 2 million. And, you know, we honestly believe that with little acts of love, and it doesn't matter whether you're giving a penny or you're giving £100, every little act of love will help to feed the next hungry child.
Thank you so much. That's such a good note to end on. Thank you. And I'd just like to say we have a lovely comment here. What a fantastic organisation. Thanks so much for the work you do and for sharing it with us. And another person who said, thank you very much, Annette. Lovely to hear all about your work. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Goldster, Annette. I do hope that you might get some more volunteers out of this. Yeah. And if anybody wants to find out more, I've just put the link back in the chat, but also as well, do go onto the Mary's Meals website. You can just Google Mary's Meals and it'll come up. I shouldn't just say Google, any search engine will do. I will also post another link on my Twitter page. I always post links on my own Twitter page. It's just at Lucinda Hawksley. So any of the charities and organisations we work with, please do check my Twitter page as well. And Annette, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me to be able to talk. And I hope I've inspired some people to go out and tell other people about our organisation. And having been a teacher, we always talk about 5. You know, it's either the 5 fruit and veg that we've got to eat every day, or high 5. And there are 5, I think, really important things just to remember about Mary's Meals. Is 1, it only costs £15.90, which is about 8p a meal. So, you know, if you give 8p, you're feeding a child. 93 pence in the pound, and I think we have to be one of the best charities to spend that amount of money. It's locally owned, which I think is really important, because I don't like the idea of, you know, being very sort of patriarchal and giving, you know, paternalistic. I like the fact that it is actually locally owned by the community. Nearly all done by volunteers, whether they give their time or their energy. Some give money, some, if they're religious, they pray, they give in their own way. And food in schools equals education. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. And Annette and I are going to turn our videos off now. See you all this week. I will see you on Friday. Humphrey will see you on Thursday. And Humphrey will be back again next Tuesday with PPG. Take care, everybody.
Bye all. Bye all.